Good morning. So my name is Lisa Anderson, and I'm the chair of the Live Well Kalkaska Substance Free Coalition. And with us today, we have my trustee partner, who is the coordinator of the Live Well Kalkaska Substance Free Coalition, Suzanne Prentice. And then if Tim Hudson, if you'll introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Tim Hudson. I am a behavioral health consultant with the University of Michigan Medical Schools, Michigan Opioid Collaborative. I cover the 21 northern counties here in Michigan.
Thank you. And Tim Shoecraft, if I could have you introduce yourself.
I am I'm with Michigan Opioid Collaborative.
Great, welcome. Well, this is Coffee with the Coalition, which is a less formal format, community discussion to talk about things that affect Kalkaska County in the world of substance use disorders and related matters. And we don't really have a guest speaker today, but I'm going to blatantly use you all because I have a couple things that I need to get done for my job. So I decided earlier this morning we'd do sort of a little informal focus group. And I'd like to start the discussion off by just throwing out a question. So I'm a certified prevention specialist, which when I got the job 4 years ago, I had no idea what I was getting into. Who knew? And there is actually degree programs that you can get at universities in prevention. So there are actually different kinds of prevention specialists, and the broad definition of prevention is trying to stop or prevent something from happening. So I'm a SUD prevention specialist, but there's ones for suicide, there's ones for pregnancy, there's ones for dropout. There's all kinds of things. So usually it's a negative situation that we're trying to prevent. What I'd like to know today is in the world of substance use disorder and addiction, what does prevention mean to you? And who does it affect? So go. Go ahead, Suzanne. Why don't you see? I'll pick on you. What do you think prevention is?
Well, I think that substance use disorder affects anyone, any family, doesn't matter, you know, the demographics, how much money you make, you know, religion, I don't know, just anybody, you know, there's no lines to it. And our family is proof of that. As far as prevention goes, you know, it's prevention can consist of educating youth about substance use disorder, about what it can cause, you know, where it comes from. But I believe that it also has to do with educating families. As we know, substance use disorder is typically triggered by genetics and by adverse childhood experiences. And I think it's important to educate the family on how this starts. And that's a form of prevention. If we educate parents, you know, when they're young, and even about their own substance use disorder and their own ACEs and what has caused, you know, what they're going through, even mental health issues, I believe that we can provide prevention for the next generation.
So what are some good ways to educate families? And I'm thinking that not only parents, but grandparents, aunts, uncles, anybody who's walking and breathing is what my philosophy is.
Well,
and Tim 1 and Tim 2, feel free to jump in anytime if you have a thought on what you've learned about educating the population on these kinds of issues.
Anybody?
Well, my experience has been that the population generally doesn't want to be educated on these types of issues. Um, I mean, personally, when I hear substance use disorder prevention, I hear the same thing as like diabetes prevention or cancer prevention or depression prevention. And as far as in my unprofessional understanding, can say is like some things just can't be prevented.
I
Like
agree.
it's down to like a genetics level or just like environment or just too many variables to really be able to take in, like too many variables to take into consideration to actually prevent.
Yeah. Do you
Um,
think, Tim, that a lot of people think, oh, it's never going to happen to me? I mean, that's like the same thing with, well, like you brought up diabetes, or even let's talk about nicotine addiction and dying from cancer. I'm going to take my chances because I'm going to be the one in 27 that doesn't get it.
as far as substance use,
Yep, substance use or whatever. I
oh,
mean,
oh yeah. I mean, I'm in recovery myself, and I know there were points in time where I thought to myself, "Oh, well, I can't get addicted." I in fact remember while crushing pills, saying to my friend, like, I just think I can't get addicted. Like, in hindsight, it's just like, look at what you were doing.
sure.
At that moment, you should probably be able to reality check that and say, well, actually, maybe I am. But I mean, yeah, I know from my own personal experience that I thought that exact thought.
Did you have like any of the lovely things like Dare in
Oh yeah.
school? And you probably remember all the good "This is your brain on drugs" commercials. Obviously, those things didn't have a huge impact on you, correct?
They did. Dare made me want to use more.
I've heard that before. I have heard that before, depending on and there's been data that shows that Dare was a complete flop. And
Right.
if you look more, even broader than that, the whole war on drugs concept was kind of a flop, because it's not drugs are an inanimate object. And so they should have approached it a different way. So a lot of stuff is marketing. I mean, honestly, with prevention, I think. What do you?
Just Say No was one of the most genius marketing campaigns I've ever seen. Like kids today that weren't alive for it know what that is.
Right.
I mean, it's 3 simple words that like conveys a message of impossibility, but like a message of profound emotional, like to family members or people struggling with the substance use. Like it is now the embodiment of the epitome of like the stigma that can come around with that. Like, why can't I quit?
I'm writing that down. Message of impossibility. I know with the Just Say No, shoot, even when I was in college, and I'm a bit older than you, as we were sitting around playing drinking games, we'd laughingly say, "Just say no," and it became more of a punchline than a campaign tagline. That's why I'm always kind of a little suspicious of. I hate buzzwords, and I guess taglines have their purpose to get branding and visibility out there, but yeah, if after a while, they get turned around, and that's, I think, what happened with the Just Say No, is it got made fun of. So, well, that's good. Message of impossibility. So, what I get paid to do is kind of futile. I think it is. I honestly don't, but this is just my personal belief, is rather than the big campaigns and everything. And so, Timothy, listening to your story, And stories have power in my experience, and it's still those personal stories. Although traditional prevention specialists will tell you that, no, it's not a good prevention strategy to have people in recovery go to the school and tell their stories. I think I tend to disagree with that. So, Tim Hudson, what are your thoughts here?
When Tim was discussing, when he thinks of it, he thinks about people not wanting to learn. It made me think about a couple of things and some conversations I've had recently with someone. But what I see is very similar. Than I think he put it perfectly. I also see a very much many people feeling it's like a us versus them mentality of, okay, people who have addiction disorders there, and then they list like stereotypes
Right.
that they perceive, and those are the only people who have a use disorder. I was talking to somebody recently about the amount of drinking that she does, and her response to me was, well, I don't drink. I drink just as much as my friends, not anymore. As if that was like a medical diagnosis criteria for somebody who could have a use disorder, maybe just doing something that's not safe.
Right.
And I think a lot of people probably feel that way. And I don't think when people say they want to learn about it, it's because they're picturing the stereotype. They don't want to look at themselves. I hear a lot of people say, well, I couldn't possibly have a use disorder, or my loved one couldn't possibly have a use disorder because they work, or, they have a home, as if, again, that's the criteria to have use disorders, not to be able to have those things, when many people in fact do.
Sure.
When you talk about prevention, you brought up DARE, and that when you first asked that question, that was one of the things I was thinking of as well. My experience with prevention was in 5th grade, I had DARE, and then I never heard about it again. Anything related to the dangers of substance use till I got to college, lived in the freshman dorms, and there was a all male floor, and it was all about, okay, here's things you need to be careful of when you're out drinking and going to parties and things like that. But it really wasn't prevention. It was more CYA type conversations.
Exactly. Don't get in trouble.
Yeah, don't do something that's going to get you arrested.
Exactly.
And embarrass the university and get the RA in trouble. But prevention is something that shouldn't just be this, okay, that started in schools. It should be a continuous thing, because people may have different experiences and trauma in their lives. We talk about ACEs frequently during the coalition meetings. That's not always just at a very young age. Trauma can continue through life, where you may need prevention services to come in and assist. As far as who it impacts, obviously we know it impacts the individual, their families, but I also think about the impact it has on systems and organizations. Not just community, but companies, organizations. From a system standpoint, we've essentially created people who fall into that category, like they're their own system, and that they're kind of pushed aside from the rest of society instead of being brought in as a whole, and trying to find ways to help and improve their lives and improve the community.
So, when you bring up systems, that's another one of my pet peeves, because, prevention gets the smallest part of the pie in the budget dollars, typically, in the machine that is substance use disorder. And let's face it, there is a system that on the commercial side of the house makes money, and there's a whole industry of keeping people addicted, whether it's alcohol, now we've got marijuana, or whether it's prescription drugs, or whether it's illegal drugs. And then on the other side of that, we also have a whole industry that's job is to treat and counsel, and in my case, prevent substance use disorder. And so, so many yesterday on the news, I noticed that in Michigan, they just passed a new bill, and they were all happy that, and I only caught a little bit of it because I started to stomp around and get mad, but they upped the percentage of alcohol in like canned beverages. So you can get a canned mixed drink now that has more alcohol per volume. And it's like, helpful for anybody. you know, and honestly, even from a business standpoint, it's like, okay, if you get a stronger drink, then wouldn't you buy less? I mean, that's how I think about it, because if you're somebody who's addicted, you typically look for the most bang for your buck, you know what I mean? And so you buy something that you don't have to buy as much to get as much of an effect. However, the liquor industry lobbyists, as with the marijuana lobbyists, are so powerful, and they get these things passed. I mean, right now, and it's been, this isn't new, but they're trying also to get it so that bars can stay up until 4 o'clock rather than 2 o'clock. And that has come back and forth for a while, but that bothers me because, you know, usually nothing good happens at a bar after midnight anyway. And to make it 4 o'clock, especially where I live here in the village of Kalkaska, it's going to be really, really not good. It's going to cost law enforcement more money, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, this push and pull of our societal norms, and I don't like politics, and I don't like the politics that goes along with taking on those systems, although I'm finding the need that to truly make a difference, that's what we have to do, is those systems changes, those law changes, you know, those lobbyists and those big industry people. That's the people, because they're the influencers. They're the influencers. And so, you know, here in Kalkaska, we are, I joked about it a while back before it was legalized, but we're making a name for ourselves in the village as the marijuana mecca, and people are traveling from other places to come here to buy their pot. And those that are strictly of a financial gain profit kind of place, you know, they think, oh, that's great, we're making money. In fact, we've had other places, if you read the paper in Traverse City the last, I don't know, a couple of days ago or whatever. It's been kind of stalled, but places in Traverse City are getting kind of bent because the rules have not been finalized for their marijuana outlets, and they're losing money over it. You know, why should Kalkaska get all the money? Well, it's also causing problems, and it's starting already, whether people realize it or not. I'm getting more calls about younger and younger kids getting caught with marijuana in school. And, you know, I don't want to, we can debate marijuana on another day or whatever, but I'm just saying these conflicting forces make it really hard to be a prevention specialist. So I appreciate what Tim S. said, that, yeah, it is kind of futile. It's kind of impossible when you've got these stronger forces battling against you. So anybody has any good, you know, senators in their back pocket that they can point me in the right direction? I'll be glad to talk to them, tell them what I know.
Is that such a thing?
Oh, not really. You know, you know, like I said, after this last year, I'm way more pessimistic about politics than I ever have been in my entire life. And on the flip side of that, because of my pessimism, I've also gotten more involved personally. And I do think that's part of the key, is personally getting involved and not being afraid to get in front of those sort of high level stakeholders and saying what you see. I'll give you an example of that. So 4 years ago, when I got this job and I was in a Grand Traverse Coalition meeting, I was talking about how my mother was addicted to, oh shoot, what the heck was she on? She was on it for 15 years. And it's a pretty benign painkiller. It's Tramadol. She was on Tramadol, which, you know, in the scheme of things, it's a low level one, but it does have, it's an opioid. And I knew she was addicted to it because I told her, I was like, Mom, you've been on that stuff way too long. And you know, I knew she was addicted when she told me it wasn't just for her aches and pains. It was, she's like, well, it just really helps me get through the day. And when people say something like that, then you know you know, it's not so much a medical reason as more of a psychological reason. And when the opioid epidemic first hit, she happened to move from Traverse City to Wisconsin, and they cut her off or significantly reduced the amount of her prescription. And it took her 1.5 years to wean herself and get off of that. And it was a tough, she's like, oh, I feel so crappy every time I don't take it. And I was like, well, Mom, that's called withdrawals. You know, my mother's 75. Well, I told this doctor at the Traverse City Coalition that. He's like, oh, Tramadol isn't anything. That's just like taking Tylenol. And I was like, no, it's not. And, you know, here's the guy with the PhD. And I argued with him and I felt a little bad about it. But I'll tell you, that same doctor has now said that doctors help create this problem. Doctors need to help solve it. And he's one of my biggest and best advocates in the battle against, you know, overprescribing. So, you know, I've kind of learned that, yeah, you can't be afraid to speak out. And sometimes it's just your gut instinct. You know, it truly is. If something feels wrong, it probably is. But
Yeah, and I mean, like I used to have the same sort of perspective as that doctor did, not on tramadol, but towards like marijuana. Like it'd be almost a joking point when somebody would say that they have an addiction with marijuana. And then when I worked in an FQHC clinic for a while, and multiple patients came through that we worked with that had marijuana as their primary substance. And I mean, I saw effects similar to those that I've seen on people that have an opioid addiction. And it really was a real paradigm shifting learning moment for me. I was just like, who am I to minimize somebody's addiction? Because the suffering is the same.
you're a good point.
There's no like worth addiction. I mean, the only thing that comes in there is like the harm reduction points of view, where with an opioid like heroin or fentanyl, it's like Russian roulette,
Right.
and that like any given use could kill you. And so it's got that like acute danger, acute harm, but like addiction is addiction, and addiction is hell.
Yep. And, you know, I can bring it back then to what I'm talking about these forces that I kind of feel powerless against. So as far as marijuana, you know, the advertising and the marketing for marijuana is something that I think and they've been at it for a long time. First of all, that, oh, it's got all these, you know, health benefits, you know, okay, nobody wants anybody to be in excruciating pain. That's why we prescribe prescription painkillers. So it wasn't too far a leap, and whoever decided that, you know, this was the way to go was brilliant when you think about it, that, okay, yeah, we don't want grandma who's dying of cancer to be in excruciating pain. So let her coke up and be happy and live the rest of her life. Well, and before you know it, the whole idea of medical marijuana as a painkiller took off. And even people who were pretty vehemently against it said, well, yeah, it's okay if, you know, they're using it in a chronic disease kind of a thing. You know, and I used to talk to a lot of kids who would say, well, if you look at the studies, well, the only studies that are really available, because the United States wasn't funding any studies for marijuana, are studies done by the marijuana industry. So what do you think they're going to support? They're going to support manufacturing, selling, and using more marijuana. But this idea that it's somehow natural and healthy and less dangerous, you know, even that's why when I really get wound up, the legislation that the state of Michigan approved, which was a lovely little deal called Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, which right there, that was so misleading. If you read the whole darn thing, it's not regulated like alcohol, not even close, and it'll be years before it is, and who knows how much damage will happen after that. You know, we don't have the infrastructure yet that alcohol does, like the Michigan Liquor Control Commission, which, by the way, they've cut them down in their numbers. You know, I was wondering during COVID, it's like, how come these bars that are supposed to be either not open or observing this or that or the other, none of that's happening, especially up north here. Well, I found out through the Liquor Control Commission has been cut by like, I don't know, 60% in their compliance part. In other words, the people that go out and check. You know, if one person has, you know, 21 northern Michigan counties, yeah, it's a good bet that there's not going to be a whole lot of bar closing going down for whatever reason, you know, whether it's selling to minors. And that's the truth. When you know, both marijuana and alcohol. In fact, the guy in the Record Eagle happened to say in the marijuana discussion, he's like, you know, I can remember back in the day, everybody knew which party stores would sell to minors. He's probably my age, because that's true. Everybody knew which ones in Traverse City. I'm from Traverse. And he said, what I'm afraid of is the same thing is going to happen with these marijuana outlets, is after a while, the word gets around. Oh, they don't check. This is weird. A friend of mine from Traverse City, who shall remain nameless, came to Kalkaska to buy her product. And I happened to run into her and say, what are you doing in Kalkaska? And she's like, oh, I'm here to buy my pot. She's like, a certain business that shall also remain nameless gives you a 10% discount if you have a medical marijuana card. Now, her card was expired. It didn't even, so they're getting around. That's the difference between medical and recreational, is the price, really. You know, if you got medical, then you pay less taxes. But they've figured that out here in Kalkaska, and they give them a 10% discount if you ever had your card and you can show it. It's like, that sounds a little not right to me, but the guy in the Record Eagle said that, yeah, he's afraid that youth will find out which one of these places aren't obeying the law. And if we don't have that enforcement, that compliance part set up, and we don't, who's watching? Who's checking? You know, oh, it's a good faith thing. Nobody wants to lose their license because they're expensive, so they're just going to do everything they're supposed to do. Okay. Sorry, not buying it. We already have problems with smells.
That perspective leads me to ask that cliche question, especially in substance use disorder treatment, of just like, yeah, how's that been working for you?
Exactly.
Because has that been the case ever?
Right.
I mean, one thing I can say, because like I'm personally, I'm fairly torn on the legalization of recreational marijuana. I do think that the system is going about it very poorly. But I mean, I remember like back to the DARE days of being told that marijuana was a gateway drug. If that is the case in my situation, it's only because I had to go to a drug dealer to get it. And the drug dealer had other stuff. And I may not have ever been exposed to those things had I not had to go to a drug dealer to get it. But I mean, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, so what, we've been in this now the 3 years, it was, I guess, 4 years, 2018 when it got legalized. My deal always is I'm for decriminalization, but I'm not for all out, you know, recreational legalization with, although, you know, I mean, honestly, you talk about, where is it? Vancouver, I think it is, where they've done some great experiments as far as, and this goes right into the harm reduction, is you take the illegality away of a lot of harmful substances and you reduce the amount of people who use them overall, you know? So is the illegality part of the thrill for some folks? I think yes, in some cases.
Well, I don't necessarily know if I mean, I'm sure there are situations where thrill is the appropriate word, but I know that our current system with decriminalization of it traps people. Where you get a felony. I lived in Arizona for 10 years, and any testable amount of THC is a felony. So you don't even actually have to have marijuana on you. You could have a pipe. And then you have a felony on your record. And that is going to come, you're going to carry that with you for the rest of your life. It'll hurt your chances of getting a job, an apartment, all of these things. It'll be the scarlet letter, because when you were 19 or 20 years old, you had a pipe, or maybe you had a bag with some in it. But that is a lifelong stress that, like, I mean, it can really, and you look at it from a situation of somebody who's already suffering with a substance use disorder, and then they get that felony on them. It sets their chances back so much further to be able to grow. Yeah. Like, our system is set up where if you have a drug charge, you can't get federal student loans. Isn't that like the opposite of what we want in recovery? And so, like, the criminalization of it perpetuates the problem.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And that feeds right into that whole adverse childhood experiences. If you're a child that has a parent that has that, let's call it a bowling ball around your neck for all your life, because, you got caught with a bag in your car in Arizona in 1994, and now you'll have a felony on your record forever. So all you can get is very low paying jobs, and so your child is never going to have the advantages of somebody who makes more money, on and on and on. And then that just, the situation snowballs and perpetuates. And that's, so back to what is prevention. So I think I'm thinking out loud here. When a teenager is made to understand what the laws are where they're living, do you think that's a deterrent for younger people? I don't either. Young folks have this, well, I'm pretty smart, I'm not going to get caught. I'm bulletproof.
Or it's just not. I mean, there are a lot of things in place, like laws and systems level things, like voting or anything like that. Like, it is just a thing that the youth don't have the forethought or the consequences planning of long-term thinking that, like,
right.
Like, they're I can't think of the system. It's one we talk about in the Michigan Opioid Collaborative all the time with addiction, where, like, the reward center and the prefrontal cortex that says, right, like, hold up, stop, think about this. It isn't fully developed. Right. And so they don't have that same long-term thinking. And so, I mean, it's not even necessarily, granted, there are certainly times where it's just like, I'm better than them, I won't get caught. And then there's a lot of reinforced experiences with that, because, people, you do get away with a lot of things. It's just that one time you really don't. But it isn't something that, like, I mean, to me, it's absurd that a youth can go enlist and go to war, but they can't buy cigarettes or right, alcohol or weed.
Right. Yep. They can enlist, they can vote, they can go to the casino here in Michigan, but that's all they can do when they're 18. I always used to wonder, it's like, why the magic age of 21? Who just arbitrarily decided on this age? Because just like you're saying, the human brain is not fully developed at the age of 21, although that's the arbitrary number that we've set for drinking and marijuana. And it's interesting because in prevention world, and this is prevention speak and an evidence-based program that I teach fairly often, and Suzanne went through the training on this. What it'll say is if you can delay the time of first use, that you've got less chance of becoming addicted later on. Okay, and they've got stats to back that up and everything, but somehow they've managed to tie it to that magic number of 21. But there's no stats that I've ever seen that show why 21. Who picked this number?
Well, I also like to define first use because I've seen plenty of studies that say processed sugar in a brain scan affects the same areas and looks the exact same as cocaine, just to a much lesser intensity. And so are all of these processed sugars we're just dumping down our children's throats first use?
Good point.
Is
I
that triggering that reward center process that reshapes the way that the emotional responses fire and all those things, the actual neurological changes that addiction brings about? Like, I mean, sugar water is used as an anesthetic for circumcision when a baby's born. And so, I mean, where are we really defining this first use? Where are we really drawing these arbitrary lines of what isn't a mood altering substance?
Well, and I think you could make a good case for that, Tim, with the rates of type 2 diabetes in our country that's just skyrocketed to the point where the health industry, pre-COVID and actually at least here in Michigan, all of a sudden I was being inundated by all these presentations of, your, health department or your local hospital is offering all these wonderful pre-diabetes classes for very low cost, jump on board. Well, the reason they were doing that is they were getting money because, the cost of treatment for diabetes in this country is humongous. And that, I'm sure there are studies that can show probably and pinpoint at a certain time when Americans' diets changed drastically. I'll bet you anything you could tie it to just what you're saying. The minute we started having more processed foods, more, high amounts of sugar, and then boom, all of a sudden, and it was funny because that's another, well, it's not funny, but I can remember my grandparents. So I would say probably, mid 60s, diabetes was thought of and the sort of build in this country that, this is kind of just an automatic thing. It's in your genes and it's part of growing older, and it's not. And, that probably too was, once again, we get back into if there's a profit to be made, we're going to keep pushing it until somebody calls us on it and says, wait a minute, people are dying. This is really bad. We got to quit doing this. But, Suzanne, I know you're listening because I see your head nodding.
Well, I was just thinking, back when I was a kid, McDonald's was something that you had maybe once a month as a treat. And now
it was a treat.
Kids nowadays are living off of it.
Yep.
You have, both parents working and or a lot of single families where it's, you just getting off work, grabbing the kids and run through McDonald's and getting dinner, and again, these single families, they're going for the cheaper food. The cheaper food is usually the processed food. And
yep. My uncle, he had a degree in hotel restaurant management from Michigan State, and then he worked for Smucker's, which was a family company, but jams and jellies. And he told me when I was in high school, and it's something that stuck with me all my life. He said, yep, he said, cover anything in salt and sugar and you'll get rich and Americans will buy it. And he wasn't wrong. It's pretty much true. So it'd be interesting if there are any studies out there that linked like dietary habits to addiction habits. You know, I mean, I'm just wondering if there isn't a connection, like Tim brought up, kind of, because the brain functions, you know, the same way. And I'm just wondering if there isn't some connections between, and of course, we've got all kinds of food addictions and issues and eating disorders that are the mental health part of that deal. My sister was a double whammy. When her eating disorder kind of was at bay, then her alcoholism was worse. And if she had a handle on her alcoholism, then her eating disorder was worse. You know, she never kind of was able to manage them both at the same time.
Yeah, there's a few questions that I've asked when I found the opportunity to of like the more medical side of thinking in these, where and like that sugar one is one, and the other is the question of like polysubstance use or poly addiction,
Right.
where my personal experience and view, and both personally in my addiction as well as the work I've done with other people, is that like addiction is addiction.
Yep.
Substance is the dependence, and that's a symptom.
Yep.
And they're diagnosed and coded and all that differently as like alcohol use disorder and opioid use disorder. And to a degree, it makes sense because the regions of the brain, the receptors that are affected are different. The treatment has to be different. I mean, it's not the notion, this classic notion of a one size fits all treatment is just absurd.
Yeah, I know. Again, you know, you're right. You need specialists to a degree to be the expert, you know, in an area, because not everybody can be an expert on everything. However, in specialization, sometimes we've gone too far the opposite, and our medical people and our treatment folks have become so specialized. And I'll even bring this back to prevention. I have a lot of colleagues that think prevention is only done with youth and nobody else. And I disagree with that. So, you know, we end up with these silos that are very one-dimensional, I think is what you're getting at. Yes, you need the specialists, but not to the point where they don't realize, like you're saying, that yes, you can be addicted to more than one thing. And I think the root causes to addictions are what we're not attacking those.
Just a thought. I was just thinking, so we're looking at there's like a whole generation that was affected by the opioid epidemic. Typically, like, I don't know, late 20s, 30s, maybe early 40s. And it's kind of interesting when you think about it, because the gaming really came out during that generation. And I've heard before, with now the kids playing these games, that it affects the brain in the same way as drugs, you know, and alcohol, and that it actually rewires the brain just like substances does. And like I said, you look at that generation that was really affected by the opioid epidemic, they were the ones that started really getting into all this gaming. And you wonder, because like I said, you had both parents working. There was a generation where both parents are working. So the TV and the games were babysitting these kids, and they still are. You know, just a thought.
I mean, yeah, certainly. I've never seen, I mean, much evidence-wise either way, but like, I know I've witnessed people struggling with behavioral addictions that struggle just as much to get it under control, or to stop, or to practice any sort of harm reduction. And I mean, there's not a substance there that's imposing a dependence or anything, but the effect in the brain is the same. What I've learned in this position like working with a lot more on the medical side of it is that it like always comes down to dopamine, like no matter what the substance or the behavior, and it's the same three regions in the brain, no matter what. And so that's where I was going with the different diagnoses is like the process it takes to get there, the path it takes to get to these three spots may be different, but it's always that. And I haven't seen anything too quantitative with like video games or gambling or like sex or porn. But I imagine it's the same. And that's where I'm coming from with addiction is addiction. Like when my own personal experience is like far before I'm thinking about using substances, like I see myself going into the same circular thought patterns about behaviors. And just like that quick stimulation, that it changed my reality right now, sort of thinking. To me, the problem of addiction is only made worse by substances because they usher in that physical dependency component,
Right.
where somebody with an alcohol or benzodiazepine use can literally die from detox.
Yep.
Opioid withdrawal, opioid detox is like the most is just a traumatic experience in itself. So that first time you try it, like you're permanently traumatized from trying it again because it's so just agonizing.
I don't know if I'm probably the oldest one here, but I'm thinking 25 years ago. Do you remember when stress was the big buzzword? Everybody, the word stress as far as being used in the workplace and just in general about 25 years ago was, we had stress relief and stress this and I'm having this issue because I'm stressed. And there was a conference or a training or something they made me go to, and it was called the Mind-Body Connection. And like I said, this was 25 years ago. This was pretty, at the time, fairly innovative stuff. And I can't remember who the trainer was, but really pointing out that the mind and the body are not separate. Okay? And somebody figured that out 25 years ago, but it didn't really it hadn't quite caught on yet. And I think that's one of the things that whether you're a prevention specialist or a recovery coach or what's your title there, Tim Hudson? I can't remember.
Behavioral health consultant.
Okay, that. You get to be that. I want to be that. Anyway, but this idea that the mind and the body are not separate, I think we're starting to get there right now, so that when we talk about root causes and whether video games or divorce rate or parent or kids being left at home, I think all of these play a part. But to put it in a nutshell is that the mind and the body are connected. And when the mind says something feels emotionally hurtful, the solution is to find something usually to put in the body or to give the body or to have the body do that makes the mind feel better. Truly, that's what it kind of synthesizes down to. And unfortunately, these large systems that we're talking about, even our law enforcement, our medical professionals, everybody, we still have not completely embraced that idea. Like, yes, they're not separate. They're part of the whole. And
yeah, when you said that they were starting to embrace it like 25 years ago, I was like, wait, what did I miss? Because we have not embraced that now.
Well, I said started. No, that's what I mean. I'm saying, to me, it was like, on, and yes, all will be well with the world, but not really, because although it was the big light bulb for me, we haven't somehow, the rest of the world has not caught up with that. And, we're still mired in our stigmatized belief systems. And, a lot of that goes with morality and culture and all that kind of stuff. Don't get me started. But
well, from like a I guess sort of philosophical point of view, um, my thoughts on like things with stigma and things with like it being like substance use and both and mental health are both kind of like pushed aside,
Yep,
and like not spoken of.
yep,
And like from a philosophical point of view, um, it's like if I mean this isn't the best example, but if Tim and I switched brains, like that classic, you know, sci-fi movie theme, um, you'd it's not the best example because it's like you'd address him as Tim and me as Tim still. But like it would be like, say if you and I did, people talking to my body, if they knew, would refer to this body as Lisa.
Right.
Because we identify with the mind, with the personality, with that so much more as and so to think of it with substance use and mental health, it's so much more saying there's a problem with me than it is with the body. With the body being like a machine, you can just like fix it or get
Yes.
a workaround
Yes.
or
Yes.
or stopgap measure or something like that. It's so much more mechanical.
exactly. You take that personal part of it away, and yes, so we pretty much have objectified people in treatment and in medicine because let's face it, even folks that are in the business of helping, we can be traumatized by what we see, hear, witness. And so I think the thought was, we are somehow protecting ourselves. I used to get this all the time. Oh, you have to have better boundaries. And it's like, how can I get people to trust me and open up if I don't like really get real and honest and share my story with them? Because I'm kind of all out there if you haven't figured it out. And honestly, I have not changed my stance on that in 58 years. I think it's better to be more open and honest than the other. But I completely get what you're saying, that yes, in fact, my daughter works in the medical field, and I was like, she actually is a tech, and just dealing with human bodies, they train people not to really look, smell, see too close. It's just a machine that I have to fix, and not really realizing that that person is emotions and memories and feelings and all that good stuff. I'm a big believer in, if you've ever read Brene Brown at all, she considers herself a shame expert. And if you haven't read anything by her, you should read something. It's an easy read, but she talks about the emotion of shame, which all emotions have their place, and they do, and they have a purpose. But we as Americans have really gotten good at that shaming of people in a lot of ways, and truly that shaming is what where the lovely new buzzword stigma came from, because we like to shame people, and we use that as a way of controlling people to do what we want. So if I make you feel bad, we do it with little kids. Well, you should be ashamed of yourself. I got that when I was a little kid, and I didn't even know what the heck they were talking about. I just knew somebody was unhappy with me, and whatever I did, I better not do it again. But I think we do the same thing with folks with mental health issues. And truly, I think that SUD is a co-occurring part of an underlying mental health disorder most of the time. That's just me, and I'm not a doctor, so.
I mean, yeah, I agree. I think that, like, I think that one of the most frustrating things I've ever done is read through the sections of the DSM and all the qualifiers and overlapping symptoms and all of those things. And it's just like, it's to me, it all goes back to trauma.
Yep, exactly.
And it really, it's just a different manifestation, a different I mean, I don't even want to begin to talk about like the complexity of how it would evolve, because I have no idea, but a different presentation of trauma that, like, I don't know, compounds over time. And when I think about it, it's like I always try to, and this is something I do with patients when I worked in the clinic a lot, is to think about it in the terms of like physical, kind of like under tangible terms of like evolution. When we evolved, humans evolved to have brains the way that we do. We were living out and we were like foragers, we were scavengers, we were not in a society, like in a civilization. We may have had a little clan, but like we hunted. We that was our source of living. We had legitimate like life and death worries at all
Right.
times. Like anxiety is what put us to the top of the food chain because we could plan about these dangers.
Yep.
Um
And that's what I mean
socially,
about those emotions having their place, you know?
yeah, and
But you're
social
right.
evolution has greatly outpaced it. And
Yes,
so we still have that same brain,
right. Our
but we
wiring
have nothing
tells
to
us,
worry about.
right,
In
our
that
wiring
time,
tells us that we're gonna die and that we, you know, because of a fear or an anxiety or something. And so our brain is telling us, this is terrible, this is awful, you gotta do something. And,
and in that time, we didn't live long enough for our
right,
traumas to resurface.
right,
Like if you historically you look back, like 20s, 30s was like an old age.
yeah,
Um, and so it's like now that we don't have all these worries and we live longer, our traumas actually surface when our brains evolved to be this way under the assumption that we'd never have to deal with that surfacing. It would just sit down there and it would be compartmentalized and packed away, and then that was a necessity to live.
right.
But now we don't have that same requirement, and so it manifests in all these harmful ways because it can't just sit down there.
So do you think, you know, so a big treatment, another buzzword these days, and it doesn't come up so much in prevention. Oh, so it does, because it's a big thing in schools these days. Mindfulness. So I don't have anything against mindfulness, just so you know. I think though it's become the solution though. So many things that are a good thing to begin with and get overused, but you know, mindfulness to me, and I'll give you my quick definition, is being in the here and now rather than worrying about the future or being stuck in the past. And so, you know, then there's the meditation piece. If you're good at that, I found out that I am not good at meditation. I can do it for about 10 minutes is my tops, and I do better with guided meditation than just trying to do it on my own. But you know, so meditation, apparently there are studies that say that that through mindfulness and meditation, you can actually change some of that, what I'll call prehistoric brain structure that you're talking about, Tim, you know, the anxiety, the fear, the racing thoughts, your more obsession, compulsion kind of thing. Where do you think that mindfulness plays in both either prevention or treatment or recovery or all of the above?
I've never thought of it in terms of prevention, so I couldn't really I can't really say I have much of an opinion there. I've just never thought of it in that context. But I'm going to now. But
Yeah, they
meditation.
use it in schools to calm kids down that are overactive and stuff, and they're actually teaching mindfulness techniques quite a bit in school, and as a behavior modifier, shall we say.
Meditation and mindfulness are like huge components of my recovery. I think that it being a buzzword, as you pointed out, you love the buzzwords, I know. It is always simplified, and it is to me it is a lot broader I don't even know how to say this correctly. Living in the here and now is definitely like an inadequate, like a brief definition. But the whole thing with meditation and like, I mean, first of all, there's no good and bad meditating. There's just like is and isn't. So I mean, 10 minutes is, that's 10 minutes. But it takes, for me, it takes the component of not just living in the here and now, because like the past and the future do affect my here and now, but it's understanding what I feel now so that I can, it's what I'm feeling and thinking. Like, how are that connection occurring? Because that's the only way I can really identify what sort of things from my past are causing these feelings. And like I have found that like certain thoughts of certain traumas that like I won't even realize I'm thinking, but I will get a feeling in my body, like a certain pain in my abdomen, like, and when I get that feeling, it is because I'm having and I've identified a specific event, a specific trauma in my life is affecting me at that point in time. I had consciously didn't realize it, but when I re-examine it in that context, I can see how my behavior is different because it is focused, it has that influencer on it. I can see how my decision making and my just the way I'm, like, my everything is being affected by that specific event. And so it's not just simply a sit down and like, that's where it begins. That's the practice of it. But it's, I read once, I think it was, I can't remember who wrote the book. I mean, it was some figure like the Dalai Lama, but it wasn't the Dalai Lama, but it was in that like, where like meditation is like practice and like a recharging thing, and that like you do it so that you can go about life with that sort of perspective, because it's easy to like sit, relatively at least easy to like sit down and think about one thing, or like when you're just in your room not disturbed, but when you're out in the world and you have all of these distractions, like it's not easy. And so like the point of mindfulness to me isn't just to do it every now and then when I meditate, but to be able to practice it at all times.
Sure.
Like I practice, one of mine is like when I'm waiting in line. Most people these days are pulling out their phones. Like at the grocery store or something, they're distracting themselves with something, and I'll just kind of close my eyes and just kind of like pay attention to all of what I'm hearing, and just kind of make it to where it's just like one sound. And to me, that's practice for that. When I have that intense feeling, I like in trauma, when a trauma is triggered and we don't know it yet, and it can be triggered by like anything. It's like being drugged.
Right.
Because you have an intense experience, but you don't know why. For all you know, you shouldn't be having it. And it's through that like mindfulness that I've been able to actually identify those things.
Yeah, that triggering is always an interesting thing to me because, as much as I've learned over the years, I've had some experiences where I've been triggered by something and I never saw it coming. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
The feeling's familiar. It's like, how did I get here? Where did this come from? I've bet. Now I will say that, if you have a trigger, with me, it's depression, but if you have a triggering experience that sends you, back into a traumatized state, if you know that, usually it's, each episode tends to be a little bit shorter because of the knowledge. But it doesn't mean that you're forever cured, is what
Oh,
I
no.
figured out. It's like, nope, it's going to happen again someday. And the trick is to be able to recognize it.
Yeah, from what I can tell, there's no like cure to trauma.
Nope, not really.
And that's the same with like when it gets down to it, to me, like substance use, where like, because I mean, for me, it is closely associated with trauma. Like when I have trauma triggered is when my mind will go back to that pattern of just like circular thought and
That was your go-to back in the day.
yeah.
Yep, I hear you. That's for sure. Well, Suzanne, there, how'd I do? Did I fill up your time sufficiently? I'm about talked out. I know that's hard to believe, but actually, Tim, when you were talking about standing in line at the grocery store and, closing your eyes to meditate, one of my therapists that I had a couple years back, we'd be talking and I was going through a time at the time and he wouldn't do it for very long, but he'd be looking at me and his eyes would shut for maybe 10 seconds. And I think he was doing some mindfulness, some kind of he wasn't falling asleep or anything, but I was conscious of it. And I never was quite assertive enough to say, why do you keep closing your eyes at me every single time? Because he probably would have told me, because you're a little hard to take on certain days.
And I mean, it is even like 10 seconds I've experienced can be like such a like resetting experience.
Yeah, and
because
honestly, I think, like I said, that's what he was doing. Yep.
And it's just to kind of like bring it back to recognize that like the what's actually happening isn't what I'm telling myself is happening.
Right.
And yeah, like I agree with you completely about that awareness with trauma, and that like is the recognizing it makes a world of difference. Like that when it's, I mean, when I say that experience of being drugged, I like have a specific moment that I reference back to that I experienced when I was in my addiction, where I was given a substance that I thought was different and had a different experience than I was expecting to. I thought the worst of it at the time. And then when I was told to correct, like, this is what you actually took, my entire experience changed because I knew why I was there. And it's the same thing with trauma. It may not be so immediate, but like when I recognize that something has been triggered, my relationship to it, to the experience, just changes dramatically. And that for me, the only way I've been able to practice that awareness and to like has been through mindfulness. So I mean, for me, it's hugely important. It requires a lot of like very uncomfortable introspection.
Isn't that the truth? I used to tell people it's like eating your spinach. I mean, unless you really like spinach, it's like it you may not like it, but it's good for you.
Yeah.
It's not easy, it's not comfortable, but that's why, it's called a practice, or or even, going to therapy. It's work. You have to do the hard work.